I was 16, in my junior year of high school. We had 9 periods in a school day, and 5th period was lunch for me. Right after lunch, I'd head straight to my astronomy class. That astronomy class was held in one of only 2 classrooms tucked away in the basement of the school. My high school was huge, 3 floors, and even with all that space, it still wasn't enough to fit all the classes offered. So, at some point, the school decided to build 2 extra classrooms down in the basement. Honestly, it was pretty creepy down there, especially when nobody else was around. The place used to be a janitorial area, but they'd remodeled it to look more like a regular hallway. Still, something about it just felt off. There were no intercoms or loudspeakers down in that basement, so first period classes were never held there since students wouldn't hear the morning announcements. Everyone called that little section of the basement the chamber. It kind of became a thing, how people would always try to get classes down there, mostly because it was air-conditioned, and the classes held there were usually on the easier side. Plus, it had its own bathroom down there, which was a weird perk.
But even with all those conveniences, there was something about the silence in that basement that felt heavier than it should have. Like the air itself was pressing down on you whenever you stepped into the hallway. And the absence of voices or echoing announcements made it feel like you were cut off from the rest of the world above. We had a quiz in astronomy that day. Normally, I was one of the first to finish since I found the class pretty easy. After I finished my quiz, I pulled out my phone and texted my friend, who was in the other basement classroom, telling him to meet me in the bathroom because I was bored. A few seconds later, he texted back, "Okay." I slipped out of the classroom and walked down the short, narrow hallway to the bathroom. The hallway always felt colder than the rest of the building, and each step I took echoed lightly off the concrete floor and cinder block walls, reminding me how empty the basement felt when you were alone. A few moments later, the bathroom door creaked open, and my friend JJ stepped in. We started joking around, just killing time, our voices bouncing off the tiled walls. The fluorescent lights above us flickered softly, buzzing in that dull, constant way that made everything feel a little more unsettling in the quiet.
Then, JJ checked his phone and looked up, his expression shifting as he said that someone had just texted him, saying the school was going on lockdown. We both paused, glancing at each other with the same wide grins. If the school was really going into lockdown, and neither of our teachers had noticed we'd left the classrooms, that meant we were basically free to roam while everyone else was stuck inside. We didn't even need to say it out loud. We agreed, with just a look, to sneak upstairs and walk around the hallways, just for the fun of it. The worst that could happen was that we'd get caught and have to explain that we couldn't hear the announcements from the basement classrooms. We figured we'd get a pass for that, and the thrill of wandering an empty lockdown school was too tempting to pass up. When we opened the basement door that led up to the main floor, we were hit with an immediate sense that something was off. All the lights in the hallways had been turned off, leaving everything in near total darkness, except for the faint glow spilling in from the lobby doors down the hall. It was almost pitch black, and it felt wrong. Usually during lockdowns, they kept the hallway lights on. The dark felt heavier than it should have, pressing in around us. And for the first time, it crossed our minds that something serious might actually be happening. We stood there in that heavy silence, unsure if we even felt comfortable walking around anymore. JJ stepped out a little further into the dark hallway, his shoes scraping quietly against the tiles, and I followed, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was so quiet that every small sound,
Our footsteps, the distant hum of an emergency light, felt loud enough to give us away. Then JJ froze and squinted into the darkness ahead, his voice low as he said, "Who's that?" I turned to look, and emerging from the shadows at the far end of the hallway was a man. At first, we couldn't tell if he was a teacher or maybe a janitor, but as he got closer, the details came into view. The way he moved, the clothes he wore, they didn't match any staff member we'd ever seen. He was dressed in dirty, layered clothes that hung loosely on him, and even from a distance, he looked disheveled, like someone who had been living on the street. "All right, let's go," I whispered quickly to JJ, and we turned, moving fast back down the stairs to the basement. I didn't dare look back, but I knew that whoever that man was, he had definitely seen us standing there. When we reached the basement hallway, we saw both classrooms had their doors shut and the lights turned off. It was dead silent down there, the kind of silence that made your ears ring. We didn't want to draw any attention to ourselves or risk getting the teachers involved, so instead of knocking on the doors or trying to explain, we made a quick, silent decision. We slipped into the bathroom, letting the heavy door close gently behind us, hiding in the dark while the quiet settled around us like a weight. The first thing I did was shut off the light, plunging the bathroom into darkness. The moment the click of the switch echoed away, me and JJ moved quickly, slipping into the corner stall and pulling the door shut as quietly as we could. The silence was absolute. There was no ventilation hum, no heater rumble, nothing. The only sounds were our own breathing, shaky and uneven, and the occasional soft drip of water falling from the sink, each drop echoing sharply in the quiet, making us flinch every time. Then, suddenly, the door to the bathroom opened. Light from the hallway flooded in for just a split second, slicing through the darkness and casting harsh shadows against the tiled walls, before the door swung shut again. We were back in complete darkness, but now it felt even heavier than before, like the dark itself was pressing closer. Me and JJ tried to steady our breathing, but it was impossible to keep completely quiet. The room was so silent that even the smallest breath sounded too loud. Then we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the bathroom floor toward our side of the room. Each step seemed to take forever, the rubber soles sticking slightly against the tiles with a soft squeak. The steps stopped right outside our stall. Then we heard it. Heavy breathing, ragged and uneven, like whoever was out there was completely out of breath. The air in the stall felt tighter, and I could feel JJ trembling next to me, both of us frozen, terrified to even blink. That's when JJ did something incredibly stupid. He leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "We have to crawl out through the other stalls." But the room was so quiet that even JJ's whisper sounded loud, carrying across the empty space like a shout. The heavy breathing outside the stall suddenly stopped, replaced by a tense, eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then the handle of the stall door rattled. Whoever was outside was pressing against it, trying to push it open.
My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I turned to JJ and, in the faintest whisper I could manage, I breathed out, "Go, go." We dropped to the floor, crawling under the sidewall to the next stall over. The cold, dirty tile pressed against my palms as we moved, trying to stay quiet even though every scrape of our shoes felt like a scream in the silence. Then we crawled to the next stall, and the next, inching our way toward the far end of the bathroom, each movement slow and careful. Behind us, the sound of the person at our original stall shifted from rattling to full-on banging, the door shaking violently on its hinges, the echo of each slam filling the bathroom like thunder. We didn't dare look back as we finally slipped out from under the last stall, the banging continuing, relentless, as we tried to steady ourselves on shaking legs in the darkness. Me and JJ scrambled up off the cold tile floor, our legs shaky as we grabbed for the door. The moment we cracked it open, light from the hallway spilled back into the bathroom, cutting through the darkness like a blade. That's when we saw him. The guy from upstairs was standing in the corner of the bathroom, half hidden in the shadows, his eyes locked on us. His clothes were still the same, dirty, layered, and ragged, but now in the harsh light, he looked even more unhinged, his posture tense, like he was ready to spring forward. We didn't wait to find out what he would do.
We bolted out of the bathroom, shoes squeaking on the floor, and pounded on the door to JJ's classroom, our fists slamming against the wood in a frantic rhythm. Within seconds, the door flew open, and the teacher pulled us inside, slamming the door shut behind us. JJ was out of breath as he started explaining everything, words tumbling over each other while the teacher locked the door, twisting the latch until it clicked sharply in place. The teacher's face was pale as he mentioned seeing a gun sticking out of the man's pocket. I froze for a second. I hadn't seen a gun, not once. But the way the teacher's eyes darted toward the door, the way the other kids in the room were huddled together in the corner with wide, fearful eyes, made me go along with it without saying a word. Normally, if something like this happened, the entire class would be laughing, making jokes, or recording on their phones. 2 students barging in, causing a scene, would have been comedy gold for high school kids. But not this time. Not today. All of them were silent, their faces tight with worry, their eyes flicking nervously toward the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Then, it happened. A sudden, loud bang against the door made everyone jump. A couple of girls squealed in fear, covering their mouths, as the echo of the bang seemed to fill the small classroom like a shockwave. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I saw JJ flinch, stepping closer to the teacher. We all turned toward the small window in the door, and there he was. The man was standing there, his face partially hidden in the glare from the hallway lights, staring in through the glass, eyes unblinking. He tried the doorknob, twisting it sharply, the metal rattling under his grip as he pressed his face closer to the window, peering in at all of us huddled inside. For a few tense seconds, he just stood there, and then he started banging on the door again, harder this time, each hit making the door vibrate, the sound sharp and angry, like he was trying to force it open out of pure frustration. Then, just as suddenly as he had started, he stopped. He turned his head, giving the window one last empty stare, before he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway, back toward the stairs, leaving us in the thick,
terrified silence of the locked classroom. We had no idea how much longer the lockdown went on after that, but it felt like forever. For over an hour, we sat there in the classroom, the air heavy with a silence so thick it was almost suffocating. No one talked, no one laughed, and no one moved unless they absolutely had to. Every so often, the teacher would turn to me and JJ, asking us questions in a low, concerned voice. His eyebrows furrowed, his hands fidgeting as he listened to our answers. Every time we told him another piece of what happened, he would just shake his head slowly, glancing at the door as if expecting it to rattle again. I could see the fear in the other kids' faces too, the way they kept their backpacks clutched close, eyes darting toward the windows when a floorboard creaked in the hallway or when a gust of wind made the glass rattle. Each tick of the clock on the wall seemed louder than normal, each second dragging on painfully. Eventually, the teacher's phone buzzed, the sound making everyone in the room flinch. He answered quietly, nodding a few times before hanging up and turning back to us, telling us we had to leave the building. We were instructed to line up in single file, no talking, no phones, nothing. And we walked up the stairs together, the steps groaning under our weight, every footstep echoing in the silent building. I kept glancing back at JJ, who looked as tense as I felt, both of us scanning every shadow as we moved toward the exit. When we stepped outside, the sunlight felt almost too bright after being inside for so long, and the air was filled with the flashing lights of police cars lined up near the curb. Officers were standing there, watching us as we filed out, their radios crackling quietly, their eyes sharp as they scanned the students. Me and JJ were pulled aside, and we did the best we could to describe the man to the cops and to the dean, going over every detail we remembered about his clothes, his face, the way he moved. One of the cops, a tall guy with a tired face, patted me on the back, the gesture firm but brief, before telling us we could head home. We walked away, the adrenaline slowly draining out of us as the reality of what had happened settled in, leaving a cold pit in my stomach. After that day, everything at school changed. They installed cameras everywhere, hallways, stairwells, entrances, and ramped up the security budget. Security guards started roaming the halls, and the teachers locked their doors even during normal classes. But it was strange. Despite everything that happened, the incident never got any media attention. No news vans, no reporters, nothing. It was like it never happened, like it was just another day that the world ignored. Because of that, we never really found out if the police caught the guy. We never heard any updates, never got closure. And to this day, I'm convinced that man wasn't there to scare us, or steal something, or wander around. I'm convinced that man had no other intention but to kill us, right then and there, in that dark bathroom stall. I'm a retired New Jersey police officer, and throughout my 20 years on the force, the most disturbing call I ever responded to was for a school lockdown at a nearby middle school. I won't share the name of the school for legal reasons. It happened on a dark, stormy day, the kind where the clouds hang low, heavy with rain, and the air feels tense before the thunder even starts.
I remember the way the gray sky seemed to press down on everything, the wind making the tree branches whip against the sides of buildings as I drove. That day, my car number crackled through the radio, calling me to respond to a lockdown in progress. A suspicious-looking man had been seen stepping out of a white van parked behind the school and walking in through the back door by the boys' locker room. When I pulled up to the back parking lot of the school, the rain had just started coming down harder, pattering against the windshield in steady, cold drops. I parked right next to the white van. It was empty. I checked every door, the trunk, even tapped on the glass, but everything was locked up tight, and there was no sign of anyone inside. I turned toward the building, rain dripping from the brim of my hat as I walked up to the red back door that led into the gym hallway right by the locker rooms. I pulled it open, the heavy door creaking loudly before closing behind me with a dull thud that echoed down the darkened hallway. The main lights had been turned off, plunging the inside of the school into near total darkness, the kind that seems to swallow up sound and makes every shadow look like it might move if you look away. I unholstered my flashlight from my belt, clicking it on, the beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness as I moved forward, each step loud on the tile floor. I made my way toward the lobby, the beam of my flashlight sweeping over rows of lockers and empty hallways, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the faint hum of emergency lights above. As I approached the front office, a woman suddenly emerged, moving quietly and quickly, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She put a finger to her lips, signaling me to keep quiet, before leaning in close to whisper that I needed to check the boys' locker room, but to be careful, because there was a chance the person was armed. I nodded, gripping the flashlight tighter as I raised my radio to call for backup, my voice low but steady as I reported the situation. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, assuring me that backup was already on the way. I lowered the radio, the quiet settling in again, the weight of the moment sinking in as I turned toward the dark hallway that led to the boys' locker room, readying myself for whatever I was about to find. I made my way back down the same hallway I'd entered from, the beam of my flashlight cutting across the darkness, leading me toward the boys' locker room, which was right next to the exit door. My boots felt loud on the floor, the sound echoing in the emptiness around me, each step tightening the knot in my stomach. I reached the locker room door and pushed it open slowly, the hinges letting out a soft groan that made me freeze for a moment, listening for any movement inside before I stepped through. There were no windows in that room, no cracks for light to slip in from the storm outside. It was pitch black, except for the narrow circle of light my flashlight provided, slicing across rows of tall metal lockers and benches, shadows bending and stretching as I moved. There was a constant white noise in the room, a vent on the ceiling pushing out a steady stream of cold air, making the hair on my arms stand up. But even over that hum, I could hear faint, irregular noises. Tiny scratching sounds, little dings like metal tapping lightly against metal, coming from somewhere on the other side of the room. As a police officer, I was supposed to announce my presence, to call out that I was there, but honestly, I couldn't. My throat was dry, and the tension pressing down on me was so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Every instinct was telling me to stay quiet, to listen. I held my flashlight in one hand, my gun steady in the other, as I crept further into the locker room, weaving between benches and lockers, the narrow beam of light darting across locker handles and graffiti scratched into the metal. It felt like no matter where I moved, the faint dings and soft thuds would shift, always staying just out of reach, coming from the opposite side of where I was standing. It was like someone or something was moving around, always keeping the lockers between us, waiting. I found myself in the far corner of the locker room, right by the door that led into the bathroom, when a sudden, loud crash, like a locker slamming shut, exploded from somewhere else in the building.
I nearly jumped out of my skin, my flashlight jerking toward the sound, the beam shaking as my pulse pounded in my ears. I quickly moved in the direction of the noise, following the echo down a short passage that opened into the boys' football team's locker room. There was no door separating this room from the main locker room, just a dark, yawning entrance that felt like stepping into a deeper part of the shadows. Inside, the lockers were different. These were massive, towering over me, 3 times the size of the regular ones, with thick doors that creaked and groaned as they moved. My flashlight swept across them, the beam catching on scratched numbers and chipped paint, the silence returning with an intensity that made every breath feel too loud. I finally found the nerve to make my presence known, forcing the word out of my dry throat as I shouted into the darkness. "Police!" My voice echoed off the metal lockers, bouncing down the rows, cutting through the low hum of the vent overhead. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl, before a sound shattered it. A kid's voice screaming for help from somewhere in the locker room. It was muffled, desperate, the words coming out choked and panicked. Then I heard it, the sound of pounding, fists slamming against a locker door on the other side of the row I was standing in, the metal rattling with each hit. I rushed over, the beam of my flashlight darting across locker doors until it landed on the one that was shaking from the inside. The realization of what was happening sank into me like a punch to the gut, leaving me cold and sick to my stomach. A kid was trapped inside. I pressed my hand against the locker, trying to keep my voice steady as I told him I'd be right back, that he was going to be okay, even though my mind was racing with what I needed to do next. I pulled out my radio again, calling for backup as I turned and sprinted out of the locker room, my boots thudding against the tile, the sound echoing in the empty halls as I ran back outside into the storm. The rain was coming down harder now, splashing against my uniform, soaking through as I made it to where the white van had been parked. It was gone. My heart sank, and I realized in that moment that my biggest mistake was not getting the plate number when I had the chance. I cursed under my breath, raising the radio again to tell dispatch to put out a lookout for a suspicious white van that had just left the scene. Without wasting another second, I ran back into the school, dripping water onto the floor as I moved quickly to the front office. I instructed the staff to end the school day immediately, to get the kids out safely, and told them to send someone with a key down to the locker room to get the boy out. Later, I found out what had really happened. The man, armed with a knife, had grabbed the 12-year-old boy, pressing the blade against the kid's back while trying to quietly lead him out to the van. The boy resisted, struggling and fighting, and in the chaos, the man had cut him on the arm, the blade slicing into his skin as he tried to break free. The thought of it made my hands shake even hours later. A week later, the van was finally spotted in a 7-Eleven parking lot. The man was sitting inside, unaware that his time was up, and he was arrested on the spot after being properly identified. I was staying at a Hampton Inn in New Jersey while visiting Rowan University, a college I was considering attending. My family couldn't come with me, so I was on my own for the trip. After spending the day attending campus tours, I went to grab a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant before heading back to the hotel around 8 p.m., planning to return to campus again the next day. About an hour after I got back to my room, a strange alarm suddenly started going off. It wasn't just a beep or a chime. It was loud, sharp, and constant, echoing in the small space. At the same time, a bright white light began flashing from the corner of the ceiling, each pulse of light harsh enough to make me squint. Shortly after, a message started looping over the alarm, robotic and crackling through the speaker. All Hampton Inn guests, please remain in your rooms. This is a lockdown. I just stood there for a second, blinking up at the flashing light, trying to process what I'd just heard. I'd never heard of a lockdown in a hotel before. I didn't even know hotels had alarms like this, let alone a protocol for something so serious. At first, I found it more interesting than scary, almost exciting, like it was some unexpected break from the routine of the day. Eventually, the loud sound of the alarm stopped, leaving only the light, which kept flashing every few seconds, accompanied by the repeating message about the lockdown every 20 seconds or so. It was only around 9:30, so I decided to turn on the TV, letting the background noise fill the room as I changed into my pajamas and brushed my teeth. The blue light from the TV casting shadows across the walls with each pulse of the ceiling light. When I was done, I turned off the bathroom light, shut off the lamp, and crawled under the covers, hoping to wind down for the night. I watched TV for about half an hour before shutting it off, but the light was still there, flashing with that obnoxious bright white glow every few seconds, painting the room in harsh flashes that made it hard to fully relax. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, realizing this was definitely going to mess with my sleep. I started considering calling the front desk to ask what was going on, wondering if it was some kind of drill or a technical glitch. That's when the phone rang. I jolted, the sudden sound cutting through the silence between the flashes of light. I reached over and answered, expecting someone from the front desk to explain the alarm and let me know when it would finally turn off. But instead, the voice on the other end came through, low and tense, with a concern that immediately made my skin crawl. She spoke quietly but firmly, telling me to remain calm and to walk out the door. I took that moment on the phone to ask her what exactly was going on, my voice tight, trying to keep it steady. She didn't pause. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told me there was somebody in the room with me, and I needed to get out immediately. For a split second, my brain froze, trying to process what she had just said. Then I dropped the phone, letting it clatter onto the nightstand as a cold, sharp fear cut through me.
I started looking around, my eyes darting to every corner of the room, every shadow, every place someone could hide. Part of me, stupidly, was curious. Was there really someone here? Or was this some horrible mistake? I crouched down, lifting the edge of the comforter with shaking hands to check under the bed. Nothing. I stood and turned to the bathroom, the light still off, the air stale and quiet inside. Empty.
My heart was hammering so loud it felt like it was shaking my chest. That's when I noticed it. The closet door. It was right next to the bathroom, one of those cheap hotel closets with the thin wooden sliding doors. The door was open, just a tiny crack, barely noticeable, but enough that I could see through it. And through that crack, I saw it, a person's face. For a split second, it didn't sink in. My mind tried to tell me it was a shadow, or my reflection, or anything else. But then, the face moved, shifting slightly, and the door slowly slid shut with a soft, deliberate click. That was when it truly hit me. I freaked out. My body moved before I could think, adrenaline flooding every nerve as I spun around and ran for the door, yanking it open and sprinting into the hallway, not caring if I left anything behind. Later, when I made it to the front desk, the staff pulled me aside and showed me the security footage from about an hour earlier. The screen flickered, showing a grainy, colorless view of the hallway outside my room. There he was, a sketchy-looking man, pacing slowly, peering at the room numbers on each door as he moved down the hallway. He looked like he was searching for something, no, someone. When he reached my door, he paused, glancing around, before pulling out a key card, swiping it, and slipping inside like he had every right to be there. That was it. I stuck around the lobby as the authorities arrived, watching from a distance as they escorted the man out of the hotel in handcuffs, his wrists chained, his head ducked low as they led him through the lobby. It was a man, of course. On the shorter side, easily in his 40s, with greasy hair and a blank, almost bored look on his face. But as they passed by me, he lifted his head just enough to look directly at me, his eyes locking onto mine with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. It's terrifying to think about it now, knowing he may have been watching me for over an hour from inside that closet, hidden just a few feet away, waiting.